I like to say that you can't be a good manager without good data. How do you know what changes to make if you don't know what the numbers are? I graduated from college. I got in the car and drove across country with a good friend of mine, and actually lied to my parents and told them I had a job and a place to live in Washington, D.C. I was really interested in public policy and politics, and so I came to D.C. just because for young people kind of looking to make a difference, there's a lot of opportunity. And so I worked in D.C. for a couple of years, and I kind of got the bug and stuck with it. Came back to California, worked on some campaigns, worked for some public affairs consulting firms, got some, really felt like I was making some difference in the community, and some folks kind of pushed me to sort of helm a political organization called the San Francisco Young Democrats. And that really gave me a lot of exposure to a lot of local leaders, local elected officials. I was doing a lot of work around sort of community organizing and with community leaders. And I didn't really have a tremendous amount of communications experience. I had some. People always regarded me as being a very good writer. And, I was still working for some consulting firms, and the district attorney in San Francisco, who I had met through a variety of different things that I had been working on, including a campaign, asked me to come and work for him. His name is George Gascon. He's certainly a bit of a firebrand and a figure that's in the news quite a bit, even more so these days. He was the chief of police in San Francisco, and then was appointed to be the district attorney in San Francisco after Kamala Harris had won her race to be attorney general. Obviously, as we all know, she went on to do even bigger, greater things. So Mr. Gascon asked me to come and work for him, and he was relatively new to San Francisco, and I had a lot of community relationships and sort of strategic expertise, and that's where kind of my communications journey began. Over the years that followed, I went back to school and got my law degree, and I became an assistant district attorney and the director of communications and legislative affairs for the district attorney's office. So I was his spokesperson, and I did tremendous number of interviews, television, radio, print, over the years, and just got a lot of experience working with the local, regional, and national media around criminal justice issues, cases, and policy as well around criminal justice reform. I think in sort of criminal, certainly there had been other ones, but I think where I really started to use communications as a data point, data as a communications tool and metric was, a lot of things around criminal justice and public safety is really driven by sort of, fear narratives, right? The idea that the longer we put somebody in prison, supposedly that breeds more safety. And, the reality is actually largely been shown to be the opposite, right? That the more that you use these sort of, the tools of criminalization and prison, you actually tend to see larger, higher rates of reoffense when individuals come out of prison and back into the community. And so, it's a very emotional subject for people, but using data, we actually kind of flipped the script, so to speak, and made people afraid of the existing criminal justice system because of its propensity to actually make us less safe in terms of the way that we have been doing business for as long as we have. So, using those data points to really push back on the tough on crime narrative. It's a challenge, and certainly, people don't necessarily always want to hear the data points. Sometimes data is not very sexy, but with consistency, and when you're consistently, highlighting what you're doing, but not just what, but the why you're doing it, that, especially in places like San Francisco, where you have a very educated electorate and constituency, we found that it was a very effective means to change people's perceptions around, a lot of people, criminal justice reform is, polls very, very well, but and very favorably. But really kind of building support for some of these policies is challenging until people understand not just what you're doing, but why you're doing it. And so that's something that we did when I was in the district attorney's office, and it really continued into my my career after working for the San Francisco district attorney on some campaigns and some other things that I've been working on as well. There are times where I think data is really helpful, right? But we also have to recognize, I think, especially in this, in this environment in particular, I also have sort of the experience that data, sometimes it's not. We have to. There's a time and a place for everything, right? And certainly when you're, there's a lot of passion, especially around criminal justice. But using data as a way to convince people and some arguments and with some audiences is very effective. So, if I do a television interview, for example, if I'm throwing out a bunch of numbers, sometimes it's difficult for people to follow. But I think that, as a visual, right, when you actually provide a video and some sort of visual content that uses numbers, it's easier to make a point. So I created a recent advertisement where we used, a number of data points, and we put the actual statistics on camera or on the screen while we kind of contextualize those statistics with a voiceover in the background. And that together, that made for a very compelling advertisement, right? Because people were seeing the numbers and they were hearing, somebody basically provide the context of what those numbers mean in terms of a policy position and why something is so important. So I think when sometimes, especially if you have a very short amount of time, you can use a data point to make a point very quickly. But if you're trying to use data in a larger sort of scheme, I think a mix between providing that context verbally, so people are hearing you, but also seeing the data points has actually been a strategy and a tactic that is working for us in some of the advertisements that we're producing in order to make a compelling case to viewers. When I talk to people, for example, we do a lot of work outside of the criminal justice space, but I think a lot of a lot of sort of our criminal justice clients, the data points that we highlight for folks is, first and foremost, almost everybody that's sent to prison comes back to our communities. About 95% of the people that we send to prison across the country end up coming back to our neighborhoods. And 2/3 of those individuals commit new felony offenses within 3 years. So that means that our criminal justice system is failing 2/3 of the time. And I try and put that into context for people, and I say, would you get on an airplane if you knew it was going to crash 2/3 of the time? And everyone looks at me like, of course not. Like, there's no way, right? It's like, well, why do we keep on investing billions in a system that fails the vast majority of the time, right? So when you provide that, that anecdote, and you provide that analogy that makes them sort of say, that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. That tends to be a pretty compelling, way for people to sort of digest, the circumstances that really kind of define our debate on criminal justice and criminal justice reform. Those data points actually come from, a number of published reports and studies from anywhere from the National Institute of Justice, and other public policy outfits that actually study the criminal justice system. But those are sort of that's government data generally that those are generated from. hone your skills. Make sure that you're as good as a listener as you are a speaker, as you are a writer. Because if you're listening to people who know what you're doing, you're going to learn from them, and you're going to gain some experience and some insight into how it's properly done. I also think, look at, especially in sort of strategic communications, look at individuals and organizations that are doing it well, right? Look at the folks, and, depending on the, if you're in tech versus if you're in politics or healthcare, right? Look at the titans of those industries and the people who are doing really well on platforms like social media, where that they are having to communicate, broad, big concepts in a short, truncated amount of time, and learn from them and how they're doing it. And then, put what you learn into action. I'd find ways to do so, both, whether it's with your personal social media, or, if you're looking to, get community awareness, something, reaching out to your local community newspaper and communicating with, journalists and learning how that, learning how that process works.